Come to Helmuth Ford, home of the lifetime powertrain warranty.
Hi, this is Stacy from Shuttler Insurance Services. Come see me on the east side of the square in Sigourney for all your insurance needs.
Skunk River Radio, country music from 1990 through 2010 with some Iowa country music sprinkled in. Listen at skunkriverradio.com, download the app, listen on Alexa by saying, Alexa, play Skunk River Radio on TuneIn. Skunk River Radio will also be available on Google Assistant in the near future. You can listen to me, Steve Shuttler, each weekday morning from 6 a.m. to noon and listen to The Haze from noon to 6 p.m. Skunk River Radio, online radio for country music from 1990 to 2010.
This is the Death Dealer, and you're watching Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
This is Trent Hammer, and you are watching Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
Wrestling fans, if you want the best wrestling news, you want to watch Shotgun Wrestling Radio. This is James Jeffries, and tell them that I sent you there. Yeah!
Hey everybody, this is Brock Anderson, and you are watching Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
What's up, baby? It's Ricky Bronson, your favorite baller and beer drinker, baby, and you're watching Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
Hey, this is Mason Grayskull, and you're watching Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
Hey, this is Jared Thumb, and you are watching Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
This is Augustus Draven, and you're watching Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Shotgun Wrestling Radio. I'm your host, Zach Takis, and this week we are continuing our coverage to the Road to Hall of Fame weekend, which is just about, little over a month away now. July 17th, 18th, and 19th, that weekend in Waterloo, Iowa. And, of course, the person that's joining me here tonight has been a staple of Waterloo for, God, as long as I can remember, it seems like. He comes every year with the best Andre the Giant collection you could imagine possible. And, of course, I'm talking about the one and the only Mr. Chris Owens. Chris, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Zach. Thanks for having me on.
So let's kind of go ahead and get started with, like I said, we're here for the Hall of Fame weekend. The Hall of Fame weekend, again, July 17th, 18th, and 19th. Get your tickets over at the George Tragos Luthez Facebook page. They have all the information you can need. How did you first get involved with the Hall of Fame weekend? Because, like I said, I feel like I started going in 2012, and I feel like you kind of started going either around that time frame or shortly thereafter.
I think my first one was 2008.
Okay,
so it's been a little while, and attended when it was in Newton.
Yep.
Before it moved to Waterloo, and early on, you just felt something was special about that weekend. Yeah, the people that ran it, the folks they had in, the friends that you made over the years. And it's just been nice watching it grow year after year and seeing what it's become now.
Well, I'll never forget one of the first times we were in Waterloo and you had more of your collection set up. You had the big, and I feel like it's probably a big talking point for when you're there, is the big Andre standee that have where you can actually get the big life-size, collection. Let's kind of transition into there. Like, where did your love of Andre collecting come from, and how did that all kind of get started for you?
Just like every other wrestling fan, I caught it one Saturday morning when I was a kid. I was 7 years old, and at the time, living in southern Iowa, we just got All-Star Wrestling out of Kansas City. So that was my introduction to pro wrestling back in 1980. And I discovered the wrestling magazines. You were introduced to all these other wrestlers that were literally from every single state. And unfortunately, we were only able to get All-Star Wrestling out of Kansas City. So my introduction to Andre, again, was with the stories in the kayfabe era of learning about Andre and this undefeated wrestler for all these years, and just larger life individual. So as I got older, learned a little bit more about the inner workings of pro wrestling and was able to meet some of the wrestlers that knew Andre, I got to know more about the man himself. And fortunately, I was able to see him twice in person when I was a teenager, around the age of 14, 15, 16 years of age. And what a thrill for a young fan to be able to see their favorite wrestler in person. And since that time, been blessed with getting to know people that were very good friends with Andre. They trust you with the stories, the memories that they have, many other items that they own that maybe were from Andre's collection that I'll share a little bit later today.
And we've all heard tremendous amount of stories from Andre, from his famous drinking stories of him. One of my favorites that kind of, I feel like, gets brought up all the time, especially here in Iowa, is one of him getting arrested while they were at a show at the Five Seasons Center for, I think, going after a news photographer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, very familiar with that story. The ironic thing about that was at the time of his arrest, I had a brother that was attending school right nearby Cedar Rapids. And there was a guy on the floor whose brother worked for the Cedar Rapids Police Department by chance. And so I got called the next day exactly what was happening, and was able, off the record, to be floated a couple things from Andre's arrest, like a copy of his, they didn't just do fingerprints, they did a whole handprint on the ink pad, and a copy of the booking sheet. And, from what I understand, it was probably a little bit of a misunderstanding. Andre saw somebody taking photos, or he perceived maybe taking video, and it was a hard, fast rule. They didn't want videos being taken of those matches. Particularly at the time, Andre was doing those 30-second squash matches to the Warrior. So if that got out and they started seeing that night after night, then, that could have killed the story. So he tried grabbing the camera. At the same time, the photographer pulled back, and then led to a charge of assault.
Yeah, that's always one of my favorite stories. I feel like gets brought up once or twice a year, especially here in the Iowa area. Do you have a favorite story? Because again, we've heard the famous Andre drinking stories, how he could pretty much just drink everybody under the rug.
Yeah, he pretty much could. But the one thing that's really stood out that I've kind of gathered from his close friends was just his true generosity. He knew he was different from everybody. He knew he probably at the time made more money than everybody. So when you hear stories about Andre always wanted to pay, he always did. No matter if it was taking friends out for food, drinks, or entertainment. And I think part of that, what I've been told, is that he knew he wasn't in for a long life. And the other wrestlers probably needed money, take care of their families when they got back home. Andre was fine with money and his finances, but he wanted to make sure he had fun with his friends, and his friends would have fun on the road as well too. And he just looked after them. And I always thought that was, just a true definition of just a kind-hearted individual.
Now, for you, do you remember what the very first piece for your Andre collection was that you collected?
Yeah, it was. It was a pinback button of Andre that would be sold at like the arena lobby. It was $1. And it was a similar piece that you would find in the magazines, but at the time they would also sell them at the arenas. From there, it grew to a magazine collection. In the late 80s, back in the magazines, you would start seeing tape traders. And so I started trading tapes around 1987, 88. And that was great because then you were able to see footage that, we didn't have access to back then before the YouTube and all that fun stuff. And being able to connect with fellow collectors and historians, some of which I'm still talking to today, and that's crazy to even think about. But that's kind of how my knowledge grew from not only the magazines, but also the tapes and talking to people, corresponding.
Now, when it comes to like the Hall of Fame weekend, how did it get brought up to actually you starting to bring pieces of your collection for display? Because like I said, I feel like every year you do always tend to bring something different every year, which is I think is a lot of fun.
I've done a few years at Waterloo where I've brought the Andre display, and I've coordinated with, in the past, maybe with Chad or Troy and a couple others. And, what I found was not only some of the legends that would go there, they obviously all knew Andre, but the fans still remembered him. And I love being able to bring different pieces from my collection out, not only to Waterloo, but to other events that I've been to. Just being able to talk to those fans and listen to their memories, their stories, the times they saw Andre live, or maybe they just remember seeing him on TV. And then even more so talking to the kids that have just started watching professional wrestling, and maybe they know the name Andre, maybe you've seen photos, but they don't much about him. And I love talking and going over photos and just kind of teach them a little bit. Hopefully that at some point they'll follow up and want to know more about his legacy.
Now, with all this information that's out there on Andre, have you ever considered, and maybe you have, and I'm just not aware of it, so correct me if I'm wrong, have you ever considered putting out like some sort of maybe unauthorized autobiography on Andre, or?
I think his story at this point has been told pretty well. Several different books. The most recent one by Pat and Bertrand did an excellent job They really dug deep into not only his career in the United States, but they went over to France and talked with some of the family members as well too. So they did a great job of that. The one piece though that I think is missing that I have been working on over the years, and maybe we'll see the light of day someday, is a record book of Andre. That was one of the fun things I started doing when the internet came upon in the late 90s, was starting to collect dates, venues, matches. And I feel pretty confident to say I have probably over 90% of his matches recorded, about 5,000 matches in a database. And then to couple that with many fan photos that were taken over the years that can tell the story as well too by these photos. So that would be a goal of mine, to be able to publish a book like that.
I think that would be really interesting. I know Chris Jericho kind of put out something a couple years back that kind of listed up until that point, because he had apparently kept track of all his matches that he had done along with the payout. So he had all the information from, who he faced along with, and I thought including the payout was really interesting too, because you don't see that very often. So I just think that'd be a really fun piece of wrestling history to see all the matches that Andre's been in over the years.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, and I put some of the monthly logs out on the internet, how many matches that he wrestled in. And there was no rhyme or reason to how they had him traveling. Back in the day, he may be in New York on Monday night at the Garden, and then they'd fly him down to Dallas or Minneapolis. I mean, he was all over the place, and it wasn't uncommon to work anywhere from 25 to 30 matches a month. And this was ongoing. He got very little time off the road. It was a set schedule to have the Giant at different promotions, whether it Mid-South, Mid-Atlantic, Pacific Northwest. You'd have him for a week or two, and it was about the same time each year he would come into your territory.
That's one thing I've always found interesting learning about the territories over the years, just to see how the guys were used and how, because everybody could have a different character and different persona, because if you're watching in Minnesota, you're not going to see what's happening down in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a lot easier. I think it was much easier for many of the wrestlers to protect their character back in the day before the internet. Especially like if you take Andre's career, was he undefeated? Of course he wasn't, but we didn't know that because we weren't talking to fans down in Mexico or in Japan as easily as we can today.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you, out of all the footage that you've seen, all the matches that you've seen, do you have a personal favorite Andre match? I mean, we all know, and as evident by the poster there behind you, that the Hogan Andre is pretty damn famous. But is there anyone aside from that one that would be you consider a favorite?